Welcome to the Illuminated Path podcast. I'm your host, Liv, founder of Eno Wellness Collective. My wellness journey started with yoga, which led me down the path of exploring healing modalities like meditation, breath work, sound healing, mindset work, and so much more. This exploration inspired my mission to help others find what lights them up. Get comfortable and curious as we learn from experts, teachers, and creators who are lighting up their communities and living an inspired, expansive life. Let's dive in. Welcome back to another episode of the Illuminated Path podcast. Thanks for being here and for joining us as we dive into a really exciting episode today, all around relationships. And so when I connected with Varsha, I knew I wanted to dive deeper into this topic because it is something that's been coming up in a lot of my coaching relationships and clients. And it's something that I feel like this community is ready to dive into, especially around how do we more consciously be in partnership with people. So Varsha is an international speaker. She's also a certified relationship coach, as well as a loving wife. And in this episode, we talk about her journey, which went from being in a career as an attorney to ultimately going through divorce and heartache, and then finding now this new love and connection and partnership, and fully transitioning into full-time relationship coaching. She's been married now to the love of her life for 8 years, and she tailors her work to work with people who are looking for love, whether that's through dating and finding a new partnership, and also with people who are in established relationships and partnerships and marriages. And so I love that we get to dive into this topic. It's something, as I mentioned, has been coming up with a lot of my clients and even friends. And, I love to think about how do we more consciously relate to people, and how can our relationships actually teach us things that we might need to look at within ourselves. So I hope you enjoy diving into this episode. I will link all of the important information in the show notes. Let's dive in with Varsha. Welcome to the podcast today, Varsha.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I was so excited to get this episode scheduled and get our interview scheduled because this is a topic that has actually been coming up quite a bit in my own coaching programs. And I feel like relationships and dating have actually been coming up in a lot of different ways from clients and even from friends. And so when we put this interview on the calendar, I was so excited to get to explore more about your work and what you do. And I know that Eno Wellness community will be tuning into this one. So let's go ahead and start. I would love to just hear a little bit about who you are, what you're doing, what your work is, and we can take it from there.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I am a dating and relationship coach. I'm trained sort of officially as a life coach through the International Coach Federation, PCC coaching level. And I work with singles and I work with couples to not just find love, but keep love in that very healthy, respectful, long-term way, if that is what they desire. I also support people discovering all sorts of new ways to build partnership, build confidence and self-worth, and discovering themselves along the journey of life, essentially.
Beautiful. And I love that you started with life coaching and then kind of segued into dating and relationship coaching. I'm guessing that it didn't just start with life coaching. There was a journey before that. So how did you find even becoming a coach? What was your journey to find life coaching as sort of that spark?
Well, what's interesting is I actually started in dating and relationship coaching, and I used to practice law and mediation before this became my full-time work. And so I started a practice really just around my personal journey, blogging and sharing my personal story around divorce and dating and remarriage. And that had a lot of people come out of the woodwork and ask for help. And then the lawyer in me was like, okay, you need to be trained so that there are some ethics and some principles, aligning with how you support people. And that had me go down the life coaching journey. And that niche of dating and relationships, if you will, really is my passion. It is where I think there's the most correlation between like personal and career and health and all that stuff. It's all our relationship to self, relationship to things in our life. And so it's really just been a organic growth of how I practice and why I practice, and it's become a real passion project turned business, quite frankly, full-fledged practice.
Wow, that's amazing. And I'm sure quite different from kind of your previous work in you were doing, but a lot of things that can carry over with like mediation and yeah, being able to relate to each other.
Mhm.
You mentioned that people had started to come to you and come out of the woodwork when you were sharing about your divorce and remarriage and your own personal journey. So what about that part of your story do you feel like people were really connected and attracted to, that they're like, I need your help. I need to know more about how to navigate through a big change like that.
Yeah, so when people, I think, hear that the coach that they're working with has been through something similar, it just feels like there's going to be less explaining to do. And, I work a lot with the South Asian community. I work a lot with women over 30 years old who are very career minded. And that was me, that was me for a long time. But what's the most interesting thing that I have learned as a coach is that as much as I want to and my clients want to relate, it is actually more in service to them if I pull myself out and look at, you know, who they are, what they're experiencing, and what they want to experience in the future from being less like on the court with them and more aligned with, what new perspectives could there be? What if we were looking at this completely unbiased from a mutual experience? And that's when we can really start seeing some shifts and things can change for them when they're not just sort of going around in the same circles.
Definitely. Like to pulling yourself out of the process and being like, let's zoom out and see what's at hand if we're not bringing in our own like past experiences into it. Yeah, so
Correct.
powerful.
Yeah.
So when people find you, what are they typically looking for? I know you're working with singles, you're also working with couples, but what do you notice is the theme of like when people are like, I'm gonna need a coach for this?
Yeah, well, everybody comes to me needing something that they feel like they need to change or adjust in the way that they're dating. And I would say most singles come to me wanting marriage or some sort of serious relationship that, hasn't come from, usually years of dating, using the apps, using every single methodology, matchmakers and parents setting them up or friends setting them up. And it's been year after year. All their other life goals have come to fruition, but for some reason, this romantic life is not where they want it to be. So that's usually when the singles come to me and say, okay, well, what do I need to switch up to make a difference here? And then the couples that come to me, usually it's one person reaching out first and saying, hey, we really love each other and we don't want to break up, but there's some goal that we're not able to achieve together that we really want. And so we want some support structures and ideas on how to get to that next stage of our relationship. I've even had clients who work with me as singles and then bring their partners to me and say, "Hey, can you set us up for success in our new marriage or on our way to marriage?" Because a lot of the tools are what I like to call forever tools, things that I still use today in my own marriage.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see I love that they can carry on with you through different stages too. Like I'm single, I'm looking for my partner, I'm gonna be married, I'm in my marriage, and being able to have that support along the way too. So I would love
Yeah.
to dig in a little bit on the single side because I work with a lot of clients. Yeah, so I coach. I have group coaching programs as well as one-on-one coaching programs, and relationships is always a piece of the puzzle. We focus on overall healthy habits and wellness, but as you know, relationships are a big piece of how people relate to themselves and relate to have communication and all of that. So, I often come across, clients and people I work with that are like, I am looking for love in some way, or yeah, they're going through some transition when it comes to dating and just wanting to consciously approach that. So, I would love to hear on when you work with singles, I'm sure that the app culture is a big piece of what you're working through when people are on apps and they're
Mhm.
swiping and all that. So how have you seen that show up like with your clients as like a way that such as something that they're that they're experiencing in the dating world now?
Yeah, so I would say, pretty much everyone is on some app. And if they're not on the apps, it's because they were frustrated by the apps and then decided that this was the month they were going to delete all the apps, only to realize that the apps were the only way they were meeting people. So then they download them again. So that is a very, very commonplace. And one of the things I love to say is that it's a great way to meet people, but it is merely a way to meet people. And the more intentional you become with your dating, the more likely you will see it as just a tool rather than any indication of how your romantic life is going and whether or not you're a good match or any actual factual data. And so that intentionality behind the dating, the consciousness around the dating, like the term you used, is so perfect because there's no harm in it, but there is this need to kind of recognize that you and your relationship are separate from it.
How do you advise to people who are in, like, I love how you say it's a tool, it's a means to meet people, but it's not necessarily the most intentional, beyond that. So when you do think about people intentionally dating, even beyond the apps, I have a lot of friends that are like, I just want to meet someone in person, right? And how do I attract and do the things that will allow me to be in those spaces to meet someone kind of organically? So how do you kind of advise your
Mhm.
your clients on for people who maybe want to move beyond the apps or have a mix of like they're trying to meet someone in person and also apps? Like, what do you advise for people who want to do that?
Yeah, so everybody's so different. And what I often warn is like the type of coaching that I do, there are always ideas that we can partner together to create that's going to make a difference for you. For example, I have people that come to me with very little dating experience. And then I have people come to me who have lots of dating experience, lots of life experience, and, vice versa. So it really is going to depend on like where the gaps are that are keeping you from making the kind of connections that will make a difference, that will actually get you past the challenges and into a more intimate, connected partnership or even just emotionally and intellectual connection that'll take you to the next level of a relationship. So, for example, for some people, it's working on their confidence so they can actually go out there and, be the kind of version of them they want to be. For some people, it might be looking at, am I actually putting the kind of energy out there that resonates a partnership energy? Am I actually very independent and used to that? Or is there a way for me to actually go out there with, arms wide open and say, hey, I'm ready to actually partner with you? And then for some people, it's actually practicing the muscle of feminine and masculine energies and attraction energy, allure, sex, things that maybe haven't been intentionally worked on that can really generate a brand new energetic pull from the universe, um, from you.
Yeah, I talk about masculine and feminine energy quite a bit in my programs, and I as it relates to so many different things, but as it relates to relationships as well, and really leaning into that
Hmm.
feminine side and allowing there to be more flow and more ease and more play and more pleasure and just kind of leaning into that because everyone for the most part is kind of in that overdrive act masculine side. So kind of
Yeah.
leaning into that, especially in the dating experience, I'm sure comes up a lot, like just not having to be in that masculine and like leading and kind of like tightness, contraction all the time. So for people that
Hmm.
are wanting to lean into the feminine energy a little bit more in dating, what do you recommend? How can
Hmm.
people kind of embody that and be in that energy as a single person?
Yeah. So it's super interesting because when you think about it, if you are wound up tight and very career minded, like many of my clients and also the way I've been in my life, um, thinking about being feminine, being the softer side of yourself can seem so scary. And so I really like to just think of it as a muscle that requires baby steps. And so it could be as simple as like, things like surrender, things like creativity, art, music, the way that you present yourself, like all of these things don't have to be necessarily defined the way you've been thinking they've been defined. So, taking a look at how you can define this for yourself and then start implementing it step by step, baby step by baby step in your life without feeling like you need to give up the core of who you are or any of your power. And that can be something as simple as um, looking at, yeah, the way you dress, the way you lead your day to day life. Um, and also, one of the best sort of ways to practice this would be to like ask for help more often, be more willing to listen. And I love the word surrender, but also there's like a level of um, acceptance with that, that surrender doesn't mean loss of power. There are some exercises and there are some things that can happen around those sort of macro level concepts that really just depend on where the gaps are for people and how to start practicing it.
I love that. One of the things that I recommend to clients that have come my way that we're exploring relationships is that sometimes I've gotten the question like, okay, well, where do I start? Right. I'm wanting to start this either a new romantic relationship or I'm wanting to deepen the relationships I have romantically. Where do I even start? And one of the exercises I recommend them do, we do a kind of a core values exercise separately, but I always recommend that they take a look at their values and also think about what values they're looking for in a partner. Like, what is their ideal kind of dream person? And not necessarily the like brown
Mhm.
hair, brown eyes, whatever they kind of the superficial, but what really like qualities, values are you looking for that
Yes.
align? And even look that, dreaming up a little bit, like, what do you envision them doing? And like, what kind of hobbies do they have? Right. Kind of really dreaming up what this partnership could look like. But for when you think about the
Yeah.
clients that you have, are there any like exercises or things you recommend for people to even just reflect on for themselves before they go into dating of like getting clarity or getting clear on what they want?
Yeah. So there is like a meditation that I do with clients that helps to sort of start that future vision alignment. Honing in on really deepening that vision of what is it that I want in the future, but then being able to make a really full list of all the things that you want. And then also, I kind of suggest putting it in like buckets almost. So put all the things that you want and then why are they important to you, right? Like to your point as well, like what is the moral, the value, the deeper meaning, why behind that particular thing that you want? And it could be something as simple as, they need to look really sexy or they need to have a certain amount of education. And they're not always tied to the things that you would assume, right? I think a lot of people maybe think, oh, I just need that because I need them to look hot. But, consider that it actually could be something deeper like the health and wellness that is part of your lifestyle that is so important to you, or education being the kind of thing that is a core value of your household. You want to raise your children around a lot of books. And so higher education is important for that. And so the more you take a look at your why is sort of what you would put down in column number 2. And then column number 3 is like, I have this thing I want, I have this value, but how am I going to actually discover it in the person? And that, in my opinion, has to be more than just they told you that they are this way, right? So it's got to be some action, some, deeper interactions with the person, some experience that you have together that really validates that, yeah, this person has that value. And the more that you can imagine what it'll be like, so like for example, with say community service is really important. Well, people can go around saying I love community service, but until they maybe have a date together or invite you to their fundraiser or something like that, then you can really say, oh, wow, this is a part of their life the way it is part of my life. And what's cool is that while you're creating this vision and this chart, it may not go exactly like that. You might actually not get invited to a fundraiser, but what you're essentially doing is deepening that future vision and really getting some more details out of it.
Yeah, that I love going that third layer deeper with the why. And even like what you mentioned, how the thing that you're looking for might not actually be tied to that specific thing. There's a deeper, relation to it, whether that's like, okay, this quality makes me feel safe or it makes me, whatever it might be. So
Mhm.
definitely going deeper into just overall clarity. Um, One of the things that I'm sure you hear a lot of, and I've heard a lot of as well, is there could be someone who's really consciously approaching dating. They're maybe on the apps, maybe they're meeting in person, they're doing the charts, they're doing all the things, right? And they meet these amazing people,
Mhm.
and then they get ghosted, which that happens, I'm sure, a lot in your world. And so, for people who are experiencing that of like just straight up getting ghosted, what
Mhm.
advice, what do you share with people? Because, and at least in my opinion, people who are ghosting on the other side, the ghoster, there's a lot behind why they're
Mhm.
doing that, right? That they're probably not even conscious of.
Sure.
So what are your thoughts on that?
First and foremost, I think as a culture, we're getting too used to ghosting. And it's, I think, very important to really allow yourself to be upset about it and not just brush it off as, oh, it's happened again. I should have known. All the things that we do to skip over the emotional stuff is really just potentially making us more jaded down the road. So, allowing that emotion to be there, giving it its, you know, day in the sunlight to experience it in a, healthy and safe way. And then also allowing yourself the steps that you need to feel stronger after that kind of hurt. It is a hurt. It sucks. Um, and there's so many things, but I think one of the great ways to gain perspective can be going out and doing some community service, going out and giving yourself a pat in the back on all the other things in your life that are important to you, that are accomplished by you, so that you can recognize that you are so much more than your dating life and how that's going. And you have so many other people in your life, including yourself and especially yourself, who love you and can care for you and give you the thing that that ghosting person couldn't or wouldn't, I should say. And so, yeah, I think just perspective, self-care, that community service piece is great. And allowing that emotion to like really just be okay.
Yeah, it makes me think of, I mean, one of the life mottos that I have that can also be applied to relationships is trusting the process, right? It didn't work out, but it's leading you, it's creating space for something else, and it's part of the process, even though it's
Hmm.
hard in the moment, like it will be for the best in the long run. And I know that that's a really hard thing to hold on to when you're experiencing dating and wanting to find a significant other, and having to kind of trust that process of like, oh, it's not working out, but it's leading me and it's teaching me something that I'm going to bring into my next partnership. So for you, when you
Yeah.
think about timing in relationships, maybe someone does the chart, they find the person, they're like, I found this person, they match everything I'm looking for, but there's something around the timing, whether it could be related to anything, they're moving, they don't have the space to get in a relationship, whatever it might be. What are your thoughts on, you can find the person, but also having the timing line up?
Yeah. So, there was something else I wanted to say about the before we get into the timing. There was something else I wanted to say about the ghosting, which kind of aligns with timing too, which is, this person didn't know much about you before they ghosted you is more than likely the case, right? And so really leaning into, how much about myself do I want to make this mean? And that's a very big conversation, like making meaning of what's happened, um, and not allowing that to skew your perception of yourself when you get ghosted. That comes up often. But the reason that it ties into this question about timing is because I'm a big believer that when you are in love, and love can happen instantaneously, it can happen 2 years down the road. There's no rules around it, there's no timeline. But when you are truly connected and really vibing and getting somebody, things like location, timing, jobs, dogs, those kinds of things tend to fall lower on the importance spectrum than just making it work with this individual because you are in love and you really get and appreciate them.
I think about that often. It's like, the timing question, or, some pieces could actually be legitimate with timing, but oftentimes if it's the right person, like, you make it work. Like, you move or you do figure
Yeah,
things out, or there's other piece everything is figure outable. And I always think of that quote from, I think it's Marie
totally.
Forleo, but yeah, everything is figure outable. And so yeah,
Yeah, my husband and I, we did long distance, and for the first year of our marriage, we even did long distance, and we couldn't be we're, what, 8 years in? We couldn't be happier, right? Like, it just those kinds of things early on were so daunting and so stressful, but there was this common thread that we had between one another that was the love thread, and it didn't let any of those things get in the way of the conversation that was ultimately like, "We'll figure it out, and then we'll figure it out again."
Yep. Yep, that's absolutely it's a similar story with my husband and I. We met in He's Dutch, I'm, from American from Guam, and we had to figure out, okay, I'm moving to Amsterdam, or we're moving to Guam, and like green card and all of that, like all the logistics, right, of like being together as a couple from
Yeah.
different places. And so yeah, we did long distance for about 6 months before we decided to live in the same place. And yeah, those logistics, like timing, sometimes it can feel daunting, but if it's the right person, you make it work somehow. So I appreciate
Right.
that note. So I have a couple more questions on singles before we get into the marriage and the couples piece. But
Oh, okay.
for the singles, so I recently was in Kauai. I just led a retreat, and I did a workshop with the retreat guests, and the title of the workshop was Relationships as a Mirror. So I did different exercises with them, allowing them to see just how things that happen in relationships are direct reflections sometimes of what's going on internally. And one of the things that we talked about were some of the past experiences or identities that we hold on to that impact how we show up in our relationships. Basically the concept
Mhm.
of like everyone's bringing their bag into, into their relationships, whether it's like someone hurt me in the past, or this is the relationship I have with my dad, or whatever it might be. There's those pieces that we bring into how we relate romantically. So for you, have you seen any themes with your clients of like things that have really impacted them previously that they they bring into their relationship experience or dating experience that are kind of like almost limiting them or holding them back in some ways?
Yeah, the most common thing is this pattern that dating becomes when you're just on the apps. It's almost as if the first 1 to 7 dates are like a standard style that they date. And then after that, it either fizzles out or it becomes something, but then it becomes a standard thing that goes into 3 to 6 months. And by doing that, like, a lot of people don't even know that they're doing that, but there's no connection actually happening. It's just like going through the motions. And to break that cycle and actually start dating in that more intentional, connected, sort of using the eraser and not showing up with that old story every time you meet someone new, that I think is a very common problem and common thing that's happening is just like the cyclical dating. Um, but also the stories of our families and the stories of our, not just parents, but also cultural stories that keep us sort of living in these boxes of, not just gender norms, not just what we saw growing up, but like the movies, the um, friends, who did things a certain way and you idealized it, all of these comparisons and things like that. They can also be really hard to break until you're willing to say, okay, no, I'm going to actually define everything my way. And I'm going to come up with a new way to date. I'm going to come up with a new way to connect and create family or whatever it is that you want.
Yeah, the tradition aspect comes up a lot, here on Guam in terms of just overall traditions and religion and
Mhm.
family traditions and cultural traditions. And so you definitely hear that. And also just the stories, like you mentioned, like what are the stories we're bringing into our relationships of like what happened with our parents or what happened in our families and how that impacts us today. All
Mhm.
right. So I wanted to switch gears into talking about couples. So after they found the person, right? They found their match. They're getting deeper into their relationship, they're starting to be in a long-term relationship. Why you mentioned that some people kind of stay with you from their single journey into relationships, but for people who are just finding you at the like, I'm going to reach
Mhm.
out, what are some of the reasons why people come to you and what kind of support are they looking for?
Yeah, so usually they are having some sort of irritating spat, where it's like, we don't want to keep this cycle of disconnect because we know that deep down we love each other. So it could be anything from infertility to how to raise the kids to, parents are interfering with our life to money problems, which are, of course, very common. So it kind of runs the gamut as far as like the kinds of things that we're talking about. But at the core of it all is this like willingness to look at one another and say, there is a solution.
Mhm.
And that willingness to show up and say, there's nothing wrong with us. We're just going to gain some tools and connect in a new way. And that's going to set us up for success.
Mm. Would you say if you were to think about the percentage of like how many times is it the woman in the relationship or like the wife that is reaching out compared to the other person? Like what's the split?
Yeah. Yeah. I would say at least 90% of the
Yeah.
times it is the woman reaching out. But I will say that other 10% has happened and it's real.
Yeah.
Um, the effectiveness of it doesn't change. But yeah, and I think also, if the partner is not willing to join right at first, I've also just kind of coached the one person, and then we work on their desire to enroll the partner to come and join, and allowing them to not come from a place of convincing, but to come from, hey, this is what's in it for us if we do this, and that can be really empowering for that one partner that showed up first.
Definitely. It's like the proactive, like oftentimes there's gonna be someone that like makes the appointment, that reaches out, that does the research, right? That kind of takes like the little
Yeah.
steps but then also having that willingness and that openness from the other side to be like, okay, I'll be here and I'll be open to the process
Yeah.
too. Um, what do you notice about relationships that you've coached that are sort of longer term relationships? And what have you noticed is the themes that come up for them, like in terms of what they're working on?
Mm.
Like, is it mainly, you mentioned a couple of them, like sometimes it's money problems, maybe it's communication, but for the longer marriages or the people that have been together longer, like how does it change what they're working on compared to maybe a newer relationship?
Yeah, it's interesting because sometimes I see it as like it's all not all that different because it's usually just a rustier topic when the relationship has been a little bit like older. But, like so for example, I hate like narrowing it down to one thing, but it's like usually there is like this one stark difference in the way that they are receiving communication and giving communication, or receiving love and giving love, right? Like we've always talked about love languages. Well, there's a lot more dimensionality to that concept. And when you are just so used to demanding and needing this one way of being in your life and in your relationship, it becomes really hard to ask for something in a new way so that your partner can receive it. And same thing goes the other way around, where it's like you think you're trying so hard in your relationship, you think you're giving all this effort, but the other person is just completely blinded to the effort that you're making. And that is probably one of the most common themes. Um, just the need to be seen, and the need to be heard, and not really having the skills to understand why it feels like you're always like hitting yourself up against a wall.
For people who are listening that they're like, I have to have a tough conversation with my partner, in my marriage or whatever it might be. And they're like, I don't know how to approach it. Like I even noticed this with clients that have to have a hard conversation with their boss, right? Or with like their friend. Like
Yeah.
having tough conversations is a skill. And it's something that people haven't necessarily been taught or we don't practice that often, but having a tough conversation with a partner, someone that you spend so much time with, can be super challenging. So when you think about people who are like, I have to have this tough conversation, I have to share, like, either I'm not being seen or I'm not being heard, whatever it might be, what do you recommend?
Mhm.
Like, how can people prepare for that conversation?
Yeah, so, when you're ready, right? So part of it is gonna be the confidence, right, that it takes to actually go in there and do the talking or do the confrontation. But once you do that, consider what it's gonna take from you to take their response and their answers at face value. Because too often we're hearing all the contextual judgments and assumptions that we have about what they just said. So really think about, how can I approach this conversation and just look at their response as black and white? And then look at it and say, their response does not mean anything about me. It's merely their response. It's merely their ask or their need, or their anger or their emotions around it. And so by really considering those two things, you can start to take some of that emotional aspect out of it and really look at solutions and growth and both personal and together.
Yeah, that's such a good reminder that, like, listening, being able to plan all your questions, but then also being able to actually listen and receive and be able to understand them. And I imagine that there's a lot of people in relationships, and I hear this, like, again with clients, is there's someone kind of doing the internal work, right? Whether they're in a coaching program or they're going to therapy, or there's typically kind of a time where there's someone doing some work and maybe internal work, and maybe the other person is not. So I'm sure you see this a lot
Mhm.
with people that you're just coaching, like, one part of the partnership. And
Mhm.
there's that idea of, like, you can't necessarily change someone, but you can continue to do your own work, knowing that they might never go to therapy, or they might never get a coach, or they might never do that. So what do you see in marriages or relationships like that, where maybe one person's really into self-development and discovery and, therapy, whatever it might be, and the other person's like, I'm good. What do you see for in relationships
Yeah.
like that?
Yeah, so I think in those situations, the biggest place where we do the work is is gaining the ability to take responsibility for your life and the way that you want your life to go, without then judging your partner or the other person for not taking responsibility. And often that's because the initial reaction to taking responsibility means having to do all the work or having to be in charge or having to actually do a lot. But in my coaching, we actually look at that distinction between who am I being and what am I doing? And being able to say that taking responsibility for how this is going to go and how I want it to go doesn't have to mean that I'm doing all the work. And so, um, and not being able to put down the judgment if your partner wants to be somebody else, somebody different. Um, but that whole like idea around responsibility and being at cause for your life is a huge part of when that power dynamic feels off balance, like how to realign that for yourself.
Mhm. Definitely. I'm sure that all of this work that you've done, both on dating and relationships, has also impacted your own life and your relationship. Like, you're learning so much, you're seeing patterns, like you're putting it into your own relationship. So, how do you put some of
Mhm.
these concepts into your own marriage? Like, how has it impacted you doing this work?
Oh man, it's been the best. In fact, I had my husband like have a similar coach to like the way that I was trained, because I wanted us to have the same language to use to actually communicate and have the tools and the structures around it to talk and be like, is that your defenses coming up, or is that are you in your comfort zone, or that sort of stuff, right? Like now it's like this inter-coach talk, right? It's very jargony, but I think the most important piece that I have taken away is the ability to like go back to the drawing board, let it get messy, and know that, again, back to that whole like fixable, we can deal with this, mentality, that nothing is complete, nothing is ever over. And as a past divorced person, I feel really empowered now to feel that, like, actually I can make anything work if I really want to take the responsibility for that. And I mean, we're doing the most difficult thing right now in our life, like moving and building a place. And, those kinds of things can be so challenging to a relationship. But at the end of the day, we know that we can just erase, new whiteboard, and go at it again with one another, even if that last board was fights and messy and whatever. It's all good.
Yeah. Yeah, moving is one of the most stressful things that you can go through. So moving, building, all of that, I'm sure brings up so much. Are there any, I guess, either like rituals or routines that you all have together? Whether that's like we do date night every month, or we sit down and look at our finances every quarter. Like, are there any things, routines that you do together that kind of strengthen your relationship and communication?
Yeah, well, definitely the financial piece is huge. We sit down probably once a quarter minimum to just address, how we're spending our money. We love to travel and we go out all the time. So it feels like every night's date night. But we, really make it a routine to make sure that no one is doing something that the other person's not aware of. And also making sure that we both understand the situation really clearly. And then another thing that we absolutely, I just love it. I think my husband loves it too. Is just like morning coffee time. And in my coaching, I call this just like pillow talk. You can do it in your bed. You can do this in the bathroom while you're brushing your teeth or getting ready. We do it over coffee at least once a week, where we just get to connect, and it's a way to just catch up.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. That's like my favorite time with my husband as well in the morning. It's like we have our son, we have our dogs, and we're like, let's, he makes coffee. We have like a fancy coffee machine that I don't quite know how to use. So when he makes a coffee, I'm like, that's my love language. It's like, bring me coffee in the morning. So yeah, that's definitely a
Yeah.
nice time to connect, whether it's, yeah, like you said, morning, night, brushing your teeth. That's amazing.
Yeah.
One word that I wrote down that you said, I think for at the beginning, but I wanted to kind of just lean into it a little bit more. Is you mentioned a big piece of what you do is people finding their self-worth, right? Whether that's
Mm.
learning about themselves, discovering themselves, building self-trust, confidence. So for people who are listening that are in this journey, right, whether they're single or whether they're working on a relationship, like, can you share some thoughts on building self-worth?
Oh gosh, yeah. I wish there was like a magic
Yes.
formula.
A chart.
But I don't know that there is. Yeah, a chart. Yeah. Um, you know, so much of it, the biggest, I think, tip, if you will, would be to really take a look at your relationship to acknowledgement and affirmation for yourself, to yourself, from others towards you. I found that my biggest awareness around my own self worth was recognizing how uncomfortable I was with celebrating myself. And that can just be a really cool place to have some awareness and recognize that there's some growth here. And if I'm not willing to do it for myself first, then how can I expect to receive it in the way that's going to impact me and be meaningful from other people as well?
Mm. Yeah, just that mirror. I keep thinking about like a mirror coming up to how you relate to people and showing you like what there is to explore. All right. So, one of the
Yeah.
questions that I am closing up every conversation here with, and this has been so, I've been like taking notes. I know people will just be loving this episode so much, but I would love to know
Oh,
what
so glad.
is lighting you up these days.
Oh gosh. Oh, okay. This is probably not as it's not really related to, oh, well, related to my coaching would be just clients like right now, I don't know if it's just like energetic in the world, but clients are very grounded. Um, I don't know, maybe there's just more people in this world right now who are willing to look beyond the shoulds and the woulds and I coulda and just really look inside. So when I get a client who is like ready to look at the high level, deeper things that are going to make a shift, that lights me up. I get so charged. I try to also keep it, grounded for them. But On a more personal level, I am getting really lit up by interior design these days. It's bringing out my creative energy, and when I'm creative, I'm more productive. So I've always usually have a creative project going on in my life, but this is like maxed out with a house, you
Oh,
know?
so fun to get to build and design and
Yeah.
just pick all the things, and home environment is
Yeah.
so important to me, and I think that creating your sanctuary is so fun. So I'm excited that you get to do
Yeah.
that. So
Thank
for
you.
people who want to work with you, that want to they're like, yep, I need more Varsha. How can people find you when you offer? In what ways can people connect with you?
Thank you for asking. So, Instagram's a great place to start at Coaching by Varsha and coachingbyvarsha.com. I offer a really straightforward, no strings initial consult. And that's a great way to see if we're a good fit and if, we can really align on what's going to make a difference.
Amazing. I'll add all the links in the show notes so people can find you. I appreciate you making the time. Loved our conversation and hope to connect with you
Thank
again
you.
soon. Thanks for listening. If you like this episode, please rate and review, and don't forget to subscribe. Learn more at enowellnesscollective.com and connect with us on Instagram at enowellnesscollective.